Hi, everyone. So in this panel today, we will discuss the situation of the CRA standardization, as well as where it stands now, the opportunities for open source collaboration, for the community to be a part of it. So I am Aistė Merfeldaitė from the European Cybersecurity Organization, in short EXO. And here I'm going to moderate the panel with these experts. Before I introduce them, I would just like to set up a quick context so we're all on the same page. As we all know, the EU CRA Act was entered into force around December 2024, and with full compliance required by 2027, December 11th. So now we stand at this critical juncture where standardization processes are actively underway, and the open source community has unique opportunities to shape their definition, their implementation, and so on. But the CRA doesn't just affect large manufacturers or enterprise vendors. It touches the open source community, which sustains with their work and activities a vast portion of their digital ecosystem. So we have libraries, frameworks, entire platforms. Open source is everywhere, as I'm sure you're all aware since you're here. And in a recent document providing recommendations for secure software supply chains, EXO identified that today providers of software products and services heavily reuse third-party and open source solutions to develop their offering. Often solution-specific application logic only amounts to 10% or less of an overall application code base, while the greater share is comprised of third-party and open source software like libraries and frameworks. So given all of this and the incredibly big role of open source within our current code base systems, the role of open source software in CRA compliance is still being defined, hence why this panel is incredibly important. So we'll try to answer the questions of where do we stand with CRA standardization, what's being developed, and who's shaping it. So we brought together a diverse panel of experts to contribute to this discussion, and I will just allow them to introduce themselves really quickly.
Okay. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm an ETSI member. I'm a special rapporteur at ETSI. I've been contributing to open source for several decades, and I'm going to try to provide a moderate opinion about where we're at, where we're going, and what we can accomplish with standards.
Well, moderate, good for you. I don't know that word. Hi, my name is Aki. I am a special rapporteur for ETSI for the VPN standard. I'm also participating in the horizontal standards at Senlec, thanks to a CyberStan grant. I've been contributing to open source for 15 years or so. My background is in programming, but somehow I wound up in standards. I don't know how I got here. I'm going to share my experiences and what I think we can be doing more.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan Maris. I'm with the Open Source Initiative. Over the past 2 years, we've been working to find members of the open source community and bring them into the standardization process at ETSI. And we're also following very closely the work on standardization in CEN, where we're also able to participate in the meetings. And additionally, we are contracted to work on the dissemination around the CRA and the involvement of the community, in particular the open source community.
Okay, thank you so much to the panelists for introducing themselves. So to start off, perhaps, let's discuss what is the current status of the CRA standardization and what concrete progress has been made since the request was issued in February 2025. Perhaps we can start with Daniel.
Sure. I'll try to do my bit to set the stage. Like you said, the Cyber Resilience Act entered into force in December 2024, and on its heels, a European Union standardization request was also issued. The EUSR, as we lovingly call it, is part of our work at ETSI. We have a work group called Cyber EUSR, which is a subgroup of cyber. ETSI is composed of dozens-ish of various working groups, and the methodology by which ETSI has classically worked to date is that representatives from industry come together to define the things that they're working on. And I say things very abstractly because it ranges from one of the newest ones is memory safety, programming languages that are memory safe. It ranges from that to, I'm sure at some point, 5G was also specified. And now, in reaction to the standardization request, Etsy has agreed to supply the Commission with a number of standards that seems to keep on growing. So do your research, look it up online. I'm sure the AI bots know it all too by now.
Don't trust them.
And I think, the place where we are at right now is a number of individuals and companies have come together to write early and stable drafts of these vertical standards. A stable draft is something that can be commented on. It seems to have most of the parts that are needed for people to react to them, to leave comments. And we'll probably be talking about comments a lot today. And in our work at Etsy, I'm only going to speak about Etsy because I don't know the inner workings of Sen and Senelec that well. But at Etsy, what we're really working toward is making the publicly available standards, which they will be when they're published, accessible at an earlier stage. And that's what we're working on right now. In November, it is expected that there will be some reviews of our work by the Commission. And I could keep on talking, but maybe...
So to the end of the comments, so for the vertical standards that Etsy is handling are plurality of the products listed in Annex 2 of the CRA, the important and critical products. Actually, I think it's just important products that Etsy is doing. So each of those products has its own standardization going on so that those manufacturers have their particular instruction. And of those standards, many of the people who have come on board to edit them, to be rapporteurs, to write them, have backgrounds in open source and other sort of technology in the practical application. So there are certainly some standards that are being prepared in a very traditional way. There's Word docs flying around. They keep track changes on. But for some of us, we have been working in Markdown and Git because that's how we're used to working. And as such, we convinced Etsy that that would be a really good way also for us to accept comments. Instead of requesting a Word document from the other standards bodies and the national standards bodies and then going through them in a very rigid process, we have published a bunch of these drafts of the standards to Etsy's GitLab instance, which supports issues from the public. So anybody can go create an account and open an issue on these standards. I think there's been a lot of talk about what open means in the process of developing standards. And so for those of us who come from sort of an open source background, we have our opinions on what open and free mean. Both free as in beer and free as in speech. And this is sort of our way of trying to push these standards, which will be part of the OJEU, in that direction. So a lot of the standards now are available for public comment by opening an issue in Etsy's GitLab.
That's great. So Daniel said earlier he's going to give you the balanced view. I'm going to give you the unfiltered view. I'm sorry. We've been doing this for 2 years, and it is not easy. So one of the reasons that I really wanted to come here today is to tell you that you need to go to that link, not on your phone because the website doesn't work on your phone. We're not in charge of the website, unfortunately. And every change takes 2 weeks. So, two business weeks, more or less. The reason that I'm really on this stage, why I want to be here, is to tell you to go to that link, because that link is going to give you the possibility to participate through GitLab in probably the most open standards-making process in the European standardization organizations have ever made. There is another way you can participate, and it would be wrong of me to sit here and not mention that other way and the problems that come with it. Because if I don't do that, then I'm not really selling this very well. So let's talk about the other way to participate. When this whole thing started out, the European Commission put into the standardization request, the open source community must be consulted. And this was a bit of a problem for the standardization organizations because, of course, that wasn't something that they were used to doing. The other problem is that, while the open source community is vast, it's nebulous. It's not one big organization. There is no one open source. And a lot of the open source software that's developed today can be developed by a one-man team, a loose community. So it's not really easy to bring them into the system, and it's especially not easy to bring them into a system which was designed essentially to bring together industry to make standards for physical products, like a paradigm that has existed since now the 1950s, 1960s, right? So that's where we came along, and he's actually sat in the back of the audience, the brilliant man with the ideas, Simon Phipps, who essentially went to Etsy and said, well, you know what we can actually do? We can get the people, and if you'll accredit them on our behalf, we'll bring them in, right? And it is a pretty good thing that we did that, because Etsy were actually struggling to find the rapporteurs for some of the standards, and we found absolutely outstanding rapporteurs to come and do the work. So really glad, and the open source community, I must admit, stepped up dramatically to do this. So very proud of what's been achieved in that sense. It hasn't been easy going though. So Etsy, to some degree, I would say, is more blazing the trail on this. I don't want to be too critical of Etsy on this, but there's been really big challenges, in particular with Sensenelec. The problem as a whole is that this system was designed, like I said, with industry in mind and with physical products. What that means is synchronous meetings. What that means is decision-making by consensus in those synchronous meetings. And you run into all the obvious problems that you might expect with that, so abuse of the system. We go to one meeting, we sit down with the group, we agree on something. It seems like there's consensus, maybe minus one person, but overall the vast majority endorse it. We miss the next meeting because the meeting is scheduled at the last minute and we don't receive the emails for some reason. And suddenly in the next meeting it's undone, and we have to start all over again. There have been many cases of this sort of thing already, in particular with Sensenelec, and it is a struggle to stay on top of it. The big problem as well is that the average time required to work on this is 20 hours a week. I would say that's actually quite a bit more, I don't know. Yeah, a little bit more. Okay, 20 hours is a minimum if you want to be able to sort of make an impact, right? There is funding available to do it through the standardization organizations, but not for 20 hours a week, maybe for 5. So you can imagine how difficult it is for an organization, maybe for a foundation, like I can see some in the audience, to be able to justify and find the money to send one of their employees to do this instead of doing something that's actually extremely aligned with what their organization want to do. I'm sorry, I'm on a bit of a rant. I will wrap up, I promise. And so essentially, you're always facing the challenges of being a small fish in a big sea, of being someone who is trying to carve out time from your one full-time equivalent to do the standardization work, while almost all the other people in the room have multiple people, or at least one person who's paid to do it full-time. And we're really happy to have some open source companies, or companies who work a lot adjacent to open source, who are spending those FTE on being in the room as well. But the community need to be there. As much as I really respect open source businesses, it's great, we need more of it. The community is also important, and sometimes there are different views, and there are different concerns. There might be concerns that might not interest you so much, but that might interest a small-time developer. So we need those people in the room as well, and the system as it stands, frankly, is not welcoming to those people, and that's a problem that we need to solve in the long term. In the short term, we've worked really hard to try and come up with a solution. We've been pushing like crazy. I know everybody here, all 3 of us, have been pushing like crazy to get this solution going. It is imperfect, but it is a way for us all to participate. And as I said, it's the most open standardization process so far. Making it a success is what guarantees that we get this opportunity, get this painful opportunity again, and that we can continue to shape standards, and that standards aren't made without us, which unfortunately is important. So my point in this opening is really come and participate. We're relying on you to make this work, and we will do everything we can to make this work as well.
Right, so you've identified a set of, I think, very important issues. Do you see other challenges to the open source community, but also conversely, what opportunities do you see concretely for the open source community to solve these challenges, but also involve themselves into the making of standardizations?
I would love to take this. Let's start this. I'll start with some of the toughest challenges. They are not insurmountable. When it comes to working with Etsy, there's simply a lot of it is knowing that it's there and that you can participate. As Roberto mentioned, the open source initiative has been participating and making it so that people who are active in open source can get access to Etsy in that manner, but a lot of people just don't know, so we've been trying to do some outreach. In terms of the work at Censenelec, which is the horizontal standards, a handful of the vertical standards, especially for critical products, and some of the industrial stuff that is a little bit outside my knowledge. The work in Censenelec, in order to access that as somebody from open source, it's hard to get in the room, and then once you're in the room, it's very hard to be heard. As Jordan mentioned, this historically, it's industry getting together for their own purposes, and the difference here is that the European Commission is saying, we would like a standard that fulfills these requirements, and industry says, well, that's not really like what we want to do. And they're very used to working on just what they want to do. It makes sense. There's a real challenge there in how we define consensus, because a lot of the industry considers consensus to be industry agreeing. So if you have people there from the European Commission, or if you have people there from open source who say otherwise, and say, it's really important that we acknowledge that, that this article in the CRA mentions open source software, we need to make sure that that is clear in the standard. And the industry people say, well, that's not consensus. We didn't agree to that. The more voices we have from open source, the harder it is for the people in the room to say, well, that's not consensus, because we can make our voices heard by being a plurality. There is funding available via Cyberstand, cyberstand.it?
Cyberstand.eu.
Cyberstand.eu. And there's currently an open call for participation for funding, and it very specifically mentions working on various standards that need more participation. It lists some of the Etsy verticals, but it also lists the horizontals in Censenelec. And there is a process to go to get that funding so that you can attend. And the more people we have showing up from open source, the more that we make our voice heard as a group.
I mean, I said I was going to be moderate. I wasn't ever going to not be spicy. I think that there's a huge opportunity coming up. Where we're at writing the standards right now is really writing the body of text. The actual work ahead, the real work, is going to be in handling the comments. And as we've witnessed from afar at Censenelec, commentary is how stuff gets stonewalled, but it's also how you get stuff pushed through. And I feel that this opportunity of contributing to the vertical standards that Etsy is calling its pilot is really one of those rare opportunities to get in in a smooth way. And I'll be honest, in the standards I'm personally responsible for, the browser and the password manager, I've actually punted on everything informative. So quick review about the standards. There's an informative section and there's a normative section. The normative is consisting of the things that you shall do as a manufacturer. Why not must, Daniel? Well, because none of these standards are required. You can pick your own conformity assessment body to prove that you did it the right way according to their specifications and everybody's happy. It's a fact. But applying these standards, applying the tests to verify that you have fulfilled the requirements by mitigating the risks, that's how you attain the presumption of conformity. Having the presumption of conformity means you can stay on the market. It does not mean that you're free from litigation according to the Product Liability Directive. That's another conference for another day. But what it does say is, look, we did our homework, we did our best job. And in my experience, the work of some of the industry representatives, again, not all of them, but some of them, the work is about reducing the scope, reducing the number of requirements, making it easier to fulfill, and I'm not sure I can always sign off on that. However, when I'm moderating a discussion, I try to be a fair moderator, and I don't push my opinion through unless there's no one else attending my meetings, which has happened a couple times, in which case I don't have the meeting. So members from open source can join these meetings either through the approach that OSI has implemented, or what I like to do is I like to listen to the rumor mill, the complainers out there, and I will reach out to them directly and say, hey, do you want a 500 euro a month stipend? I will hire you from my company to go to work in these groups in Etsy, in any standard work group that interests you, because I am a full member there. I can pull that off. And to date, it's worked once, and I'm hopefully, maybe there's someone else here in the room who might be interested, or a couple people hit me up afterwards. And I think that's a possibility that other groups, like other OSPOs in the room, who might still be in the room, could begin to see as a way to support the larger work to be done on standards. Sorry.
Right, so just to backtrack a little bit, the idea of these horizontal versus vertical standards has come up across your speeches. Could you explain a little bit this two-tiered approach of vertical versus horizontal standards, and why was this structure chosen?
Who wants this one?
I really don't want this one.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. A horizontal standard does not provide the presumption of conformity because, generally speaking, they should apply to all products, and they're more or less process-oriented. These are product-based standards, and yet you have things like secure development processes. Like, how do you standardize that, really? Right? So the verticals, on the other hand, are more or less laser focused on types of products that are for sale on the market, like a VPN, like a browser. There are browsers for sale. There are embedded browsers and products, and these are important vectors that can, for better or worse, modify people's lives, and that's what we're here to protect, right? So each vertical has a scope that defines what it's about, and then it introduces the architecture, the terms, the users, the use cases, and then with a set of controls gives the manufacturer an opportunity to really prove that they have secured the product to the best of their ability. So that's basically the difference between the verticals and the horizontals.
So the horizontals, they cover things like vulnerability management. They cover, there's actually a pretty decent list in Annex 1? In Annex 1 of the CRA of all the different expectations of all products on the market with digital elements. And the horizontal standards, of which there will theoretically be 3 or 4, are meant to cover all of those requirements. As Jan said, they won't provide presumption of conformity because of their breadth, but they will give products the ability to go through the self-certification process for their CE mark. The module A, I think. Yeah. And so there's some sort of broad security requirements, and there's going to be very specific things like vulnerability handling, disclosure, that kind of thing that is in process right now. So the horizontal standards will be sort of available for all products, and the vertical standards will be very, as Gail said, laser focused on specific types of products as defined by the EC.
But again, I get one of those famous ones. What about the password manager in your browser? Yeah, you're going to have to, I mean, you're saying it's a browser, but you're also going to have to show that you have hardened the password manager according to the password manager vertical. And so we start to get into this area of what are affectionately called broad verticals. Now you know.
Right, so from horizontal to vertical, what is the relationship between Etsy and Senselect work? And what are the challenges both of these groups are seeing? Are there any shared challenges or different challenges? Yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
So yesterday we had a really nice talk here where a member of the European Commission used the metaphor of the standardization process being a bus.
Oh no.
To describe what is happening between Etsy and Standardization right now, the relationship between the horizontal and vertical standards, I think the best metaphor I've come up with is they're fighting for the steering wheel. And one controls the accelerator and brake, and the other controls the steering wheel, and they argue about where they want to go. That's like the challenge we have at the moment. So just to go back, like, we can easily participate in the verticals. Everyone in this room can go and comment on the verticals. For the horizontals, it's very difficult for us to access. And I know as well, I don't know, maybe some people on stage can confirm as well, that there have been some challenges in working out how actually do we make sure that the verticals are aligned with what's being said in the horizontals, that there aren't clashes. And when there are two organizations that don't even like talking to each other who have to make these decisions, it can be very, very challenging to align them.
I would like to say it's not that we don't like talking to each other. We had a very famous, very amazing workshop in Amsterdam where the verticals authors of Standardization and Etsy, and we got together, and it was super productive. I think that the rapporteurs, I think on that level, we get along really well.
It's an organizational level that they're not doing a great job of collaborating. Yeah, I agree. At the rapporteur level, I think we're doing great.
Yeah.
We're doing our best.
And just as a nuance, there are a number of verticals being treated by Standardization. Those tend toward important to and critical types, which are the ones that you cannot self-assess, as in using module A. You can always use module H or modules B and C together if that's the way you roll, but only important class 1 affords you the ability to use module A. Do you know what those are? Raise your hands. You know module A? Okay. Module B, C, module H. I'll try to be really quick. Module A is the type of self-assessment where you look at, for example, a vertical standard that's been provided, and you say, yes, we conform. It could also be something like EUCC that you apply, and I mean, with EUCC, you also have to verify the applicability of your processes, because EUCC doesn't cover those. Anyway, Module BC is where you hire the services of a conformity assessment body, which is, in the best case, a notified body. A notified body is an entity that the government of a member state of Europe says, yes, we approve you to certify the conformity of a product. So the CAB will then apply this, best case, apply this vertical standard, such as VPNs, and look at your product and run through all of the tests and verify with the evidence that they found that you are conform, or force you to conform before you can place your product on the market. C is a slight addition to that. The two of them go together, but ultimately, once you're on the market, doesn't mean you can stay on the market, so you have to continuously verify. Module H is the outlier here. Basically what it's saying is, oh, you're a producer of 1,000 different products that look very similar but are all slightly different. Instead of going through Module BC to get conformity assessment, we're just going to, as a conformity assessment body, certify that your QMS, your quality management system, is appropriate and in line with the expectations of a manufacturer doing the things you're doing. It could be software, it could be an operating system, it could also be and I think this is where a huge market's going to arise, for those of you interested, is going to be in the Internet of Things, because they're so similar, but they're so different, right? And so aligning that with the quality management system is then going to be the Module H. Those are the 3 types of conformity assessment approved by the Cyber Resilience Act. If you want to know more, read the NLF.
To bring it back a little bit more to open source community, what are the main challenges this community faces in CRA implementation, and what strategies can really help address those specific challenges?
There are a lot of people who are really concerned that their one-person project is somehow going to be squished out by the CRA. The only reason I can possibly imagine that this is happening is FUD being, fear, uncertainty, and doubt being spread around by larger companies who aren't being very thoughtful in how they talk about the CRA. Open source projects that are just out there on GitHub are exempt from having to do anything if they don't want to. The CRA is quite clear about this. The reason open source comes up in the CRA is to be able to talk about all of the ways that open source projects aren't to be forced to change their processes. The only way that something is sort of required to conform to the CRA if it's being put on the market, if it's being sold or otherwise sort of used as a profit-making venture. So the short version, open source projects don't have to do anything. When they start getting included into other products that are being put on the market, they're inevitably going to have somebody from some company saying, "Hey, will you give us some sort of attestation that you're secure?" And the open source project can say, "No." And that's an option. So I think that's the thing I really want sort of to be out there in the open source world. I think that it would be very good that we find ways to provide attestation for a lot of things that are going to be included in other products, as we talked about earlier today in the workshop. But I think it's really important that the baseline knowledge for open source is you don't have to do anything. Just keep making your code.
There's one thing, if you may, there's one thing that everybody's going to have to do, though, with the CRA. You're going to have to disclose that you're using a licensed piece of open source software. I see this everywhere I look, that manufacturers are so proud of their products on Product Hunt, yada, 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 and no one is telling anybody else what licenses they've agreed to. And that is actually a violation not only of the spirit of open source, but a violation of the law. If you do not disclose, it's right after that MIT declaration. You must disclose that you're using this license and this copyright. You must. And I think that's actually going to be a positive impact for open source, because it's going to lead to more visibility for the work that we are all doing, the work that our friends who have this great idea are doing, and I think more visibility as a whole is a positive side effect of this whole CRA thing.
Could I just add a point on the challenges for open source? So, like has already been said, the challenge is not actually primarily for open source and the community. The challenge is for manufacturers. There is, however, a problem. And the problem is that depending on how the standards are written, it could actually end up having an impact on us. So, example, the standards are written in such a way that makes it difficult for a manufacturer integrating open source components to comply. Suddenly, we're being locked out of the software market. And also, I mean, it also poses significant growth problems for the European Union because our companies lean on open source to get stuff done, right? But if the standards get done wrong, that for me is my biggest fear. That if the standards get done wrong, we end up like locking ourselves out of the market. And that's why it's so important that the open source community comes and tries to participate as much as possible in this.
Right, and we all want, I guess in the panel we agree that the open source community, we want to engage it in writing these standards. But when talking about small projects or individual maintainers, how can they realistically participate in the standardization process without using significant resources that they might not have?
Can I?
Go ahead. Yeah.
That's what this project is all about. It's about giving people who don't have the time to come and sit in a 4-hour meeting, or like 8 4-hour meetings, or a week of 4-hour meetings, the possibility to just go onto GitLab and do what they would do for software, open an issue, write out what the problem is, and have the people who are working on it solve it. Now, there are some things that we'd like to do more. I personally would love it if people from the community could submit merge requests to the standards. I would really, really love it if there could be discussions about the issues, and it wasn't just you submit the issue and wait for Etsy or something to do something about it. We're not there yet, but this is that first stage, and I think if it's successful, we have the possibility to unlock something more. And one last little thing. There was a board outside earlier today which wrote, what are your biggest fears about this whole thing? And I wrote on the board, I'm scared that the CRA will be a one-off. If it is, we will lose out in the future. If it's not, if we manage to succeed this time, then we have the opportunity to do this again and to improve on the process and to get it closer to the process that kind of we're all used to using, right?
I just thought I'd mention that all of those projects that are on GitLab waiting for your issues, they are just Git remotes. If you wanted to pull them onto your computer to review them, you could do that. And then if you push them to your own Git remote, I mean, they're just Git remotes.
And this brings us back to the IPR question. And I think that the struggle that we're facing with why can't some random
Daniel,
person
what does
on the
IPR stand for?
intellectual property rights. which we're actually required to talk about every time we have a meeting at Etsy. We have to introduce the IPR rights, we have to do the anti-cartel, we also have a code of conduct. But the reason why I'm cherry-picking IPR right now is because that's how the industry has always worked. I'm not suggesting we're late to the game, I'm just suggesting we never got invited on. I'm not going to say it. I think that the struggle that we're facing and are able to talk to Etsy leadership about, and some days since then, like when the lawsuit against the commission is over, but what we're able to talk to them about is this new notion of free and open, and how this can impact standards. Because I worry if we don't pull this off here, if this is that one-off, that in 5 years we might come back together and start the first open source standards body because we're fed up with it. I don't know. I mean, would you be able to write open standards? I mean, that's what we've been doing for decades anyway. It wouldn't be that hard, and I'm not trying to threaten anybody here. I don't want to like say, oh, we're going to just fork everything. But I feel that the individual developer, to come back to your original question here, the individual developer has an opportunity to inform themselves that they didn't have 5 years ago. So getting informed, it's like, I don't know, I've been on stage before and people have asked me, how do you get it started in open source? File a documentation PR. Get involved, read about it, get informed, understand the difference between module A, B, C, and H, right? Like learn about this stuff so that you can be an informed resource to help your colleagues learn about it. And I mean, to come back to my story, the way I got involved is because I was freaking scared about my community. You know, there's 100,000 people developing with our open source framework, and suddenly they're going to be clobbered by European regulations? That wasn't part of the deal. Like, I thought we were making good software, and good always meant secure, performant, efficient, easy to make, and now it has to be compliant too. What does that mean? And so by getting involved and supporting your community that way, I think that that's something that every individual developer, open sourcer can do.
Right. So I would like to open the floor in the last few minutes for any audience questions. We have time for maybe one or two very quick questions. There in the back, yeah?
Go to chapter 5, pick out a test, and literally read it through, analyze it in your mind. Is this something that a skilled person could accomplish? If not, provide a comment. Say, Daniel, nobody fuzzes the kernel on their iPhone. Are you crazy? I mean, I'm not saying that would happen, but...
Yeah, so clause 5 is the requirements clause of all of these Etsy vertical standards, and it is full of the technical requirements and then the mitigations based on use cases. So we're making sure that nobody is required to put in an excessive amount of high security when their use is something that is very low security need. And yeah, clause 5 for all of these standards is there ready to be commented on, so you can take a look and see. You know, I don't think the test makes sure on this requirement makes sense in this requirement, or this requirement doesn't have a test yet, but I know I could write a test.
Right. Yeah, like gaps.
Gaps.
I think we all agree that it's full of gaps. There could always be more, and if there's something that you're noticing.
If you're interested as well in writing some wording, if you put that into your comment, it would be completely normal if the rapporteurs were to take that comment and integrate it in their own name in complete compliance with Etsy's IPR policy. So if you did want to put a suggestion in your comments, that would also be fine. But it doesn't even have to be as deep as contributions on the content. It can be, I'm sorry, but this is unclear, or you've misspelt standardization. We'll take any comment that you give. But if the comments on the technical details, that's what really kind of from the open source community is valuable.
Oh, but this is actually really important. please don't use LLMs to generate comments. We want your expertise. We want the expertise of the individuals who have spent their career thinking about this and writing about this and implementing this. So go ahead and use your LLMs for whatever you're going to use them for, but if you're going to write comments or write contributions, please make those from yourself. Your knowledge is what we're looking for.
Okay. Yeah.
Another question.
Go ahead.
Here. Pretty much all of the examples you've given for getting involved have been with ETSI and the vertical standards. What if my interest is in the horizontal standards? How can I start making similar contributions there?
Daniel, do you want to start, or should I?
Daniel doesn't work with the horizontals.
So
That's what I feared.
what we can do for you, if you're an individual, there's a possibility that OSI might be able to bring you in. So what we'll do is we will register you as a representative of the OSI at ETSI. Then we will send an email, which will be processed within 2 business weeks, to try to get you seconded to go to Sensenelec. Now, that will mean you'll be able to attend the Sensenelec meetings. Whether that means Sensenelec have to listen to anything you say is another question. But
the more voices, the better.
The more voices, the better. And as I said, please do reach out to myself or Simon. We will try to do what we can to get you in. We'll bring you into the group, and we can chat.
Yeah, I'll chat to you afterwards.
The alternative approach, as if you were here yesterday evening, I was brushed off with, is that you can go to your national standards body and contact them and ask them if you could represent them as an expert in Sensenelec for this purpose. There is also some funding, in theory, from Cyberstand to do this kind of work. Also, yesterday evening, there was somebody who quite proudly announced how many open source projects he had denied funding to because their applications were too focused on the open source project and not focused enough on the standards. So that's very helpful. Now we know what they want to see, and so we can make sure that we provide an application for funding that is exactly what they're looking for. So if you're looking for funding to participate in either the vertical or the horizontal standards, Cyberstand has a current SSP, basically a call for proposals kind of thing.
Just to add, yeah, they have a call for SSPs until November 7th, so if that interests you, it's still an ongoing application process and you can apply.
And they will also potentially provide funding to join the appropriate standards body if that is necessary, in theory. Yeah.
One last very quick question if anyone has.
We do, yep.
Hi, so I'm an active participant in the vertical around hypervisors and container runtime systems. And so I saw the email pass by that there's like a GitLab thing now, but in our vertical, we don't really use that. So I'm wondering like, what's the link between the GitLab instance and like the vertical meetings? Like, is the intent to like do all the comments on the GitLab and no longer using the Etsy template, or like, what's the practical way you see? If you know one.
Sure. So I would like to point out that all meetings held by special rapporteurs are unofficial meetings. Yeah. They do follow the Etsy protocol, but they are not decision-making bodies. That's reserved for TC Cyber, obviously.
TC Cyber EUSR, chaired by Sandra.
Yeah, and so it is up to the rapporteur, potentially in discussion with the participants, which methodology they prefer. Some have chosen wisely for the Git-based approach, and others have chosen poorly for the proprietary software approach. I'm allowed to make these distinctions because a proprietary approach is not, in the context that I'm familiar with working, appropriate. We're making open standards. It should be accessible to everyone. Why do I have to purchase Microsoft licenses for my team to work on something that is in the common good?
There are going to be GitLab projects for all of the vertical standards at Etsy, regardless of how the rapporteur is working. So for most of them, you'll see the markdown version of the standard, and you'll be able to open issues. For the ones where the rapporteur has been working in Microsoft Word, you'll be able to download the Word document and still open your issues.
I think we've also provided it as a PDF. I've tried to make sure that they provide it as a PDF, so there's also a format that you can open without proprietary software.
And if you ask the rapporteur, you can get it as an EPUB too.
Oh, wow.
Thanks a lot for everyone's questions, and thank you to the panelists. I'll just give you guys one last sentence if you want to just finish your thoughts.
Sure. You asked why only some are using GitLab, because it's not standardized yet. None of it's normalized yet. We're not onto this. If we succeed this time, we can change the way it's done in the future for the better, and that's why it's so important that we do it right now.
As I mentioned earlier, I am the rapporteur for the VPNs vertical at Etsy, and I would really love your contributions. It's not been easy getting people to get involved because a lot of the VPNs out there are very small companies and they just can't afford to send people to work on these standards full time. So if any of you all have any knowledge about VPNs, I would love for you to participate and I will find a way. Also SIEM.
Basically, if you want to participate, there are ways we can support that without even bending any rules. Should we have to bend rules, we'll confirm that that's possible, but not on stage.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.